Oh, since we do have another moment. Okay, all right. Well, there you go. Never mind. All right. So thank you all again for enjoying your lemonade and chit chat and joining us back here just for a few more minutes while we have the wonderful opportunity to raise questions and have a little bit of a discussion with our preacher for the hour, the Reverend Mia McClain. My name is Reverend Tara Gibbs. We're so excited that you were here for our Talk Back series. It's a unique opportunity, again, to just do what I just said, have a conversation with our proclaimer for the hour. I have a few cards that some left with me. If something else comes up, if we have a moment, I'll invite you to raise your hand for those who are here. If you're online, we still want to invite you to email us at talkback@myersparkbaptist.org, and we'll do our best to get to your questions here in this moment. And if not, we will forward them on to our proclaimer. So, first question, how you doing, Reverend Mia?
I'm good.
Good. A powerful message. Truly enjoyed that message, so thank you. And I was just chatting out here. We had some, wonderful message. Even just in my chat and lemonade time, we had some great conversation with people who the very first thing that they had to say was the visuals as well as the interactive call to action was some of the first they had seen in a church that typically sticks to concepts and ideas, which are important and needed. But having the action moment right here in the sanctuary, I think, was powerful, and just seeing people lined up ready to give, to move, to do, and act. Could you just share with us what kind of inspired this activity and engagement, if you will?
Well, frankly, I was pissed off. That's how most of it starts. When we had those 2 mass shootings back to back, I was like, we cannot come in here and do the same stuff we've been doing. We got to do something else. And I'm always trying to think outside the box. One of the things that I was kind of wrestling with in the moment following Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas, was the fact that we only really have an hour of people's time. And we've been talking about this from a faith formation perspective, but we really only have an hour of most people's time a week. And so, we can plan an extra service. It'll be, scarcely, attended, and you do all this work to have a vigil and 20 people show up, which is fine. We can do these extra things, but what would it be like to bring those moments into the actual Sunday morning service to maximize our time together? This is just the reality of church. And so how do we do that? And one of the first times I experienced something like this was when my friends planted a church in Brooklyn. They're pastors in Brooklyn. And I went to one of their first introductory services, and as part of a liturgical act, they handed out something about like calling our senator in New York or something. Something was going on crazy in New York. And they were like, we're gonna do this right now. You're gonna sign this letter. We've already read the letter for you. We can vouch for it. And then we all put the letters of our signatures in the basket or something, and they took that to wherever they needed to go. And that was active in their worship service. And so that was probably one of the first times I experienced something like that. So I've kind of been, thinking about that for a while, maybe like 4 years now, 3 or 4 years.
Well, thank you for bringing it to us.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get caught up in tradition for tradition's sake and forgetting that traditions have rich meaning, rich history behind it. The act of communion is, like you said, today seems to be more of a political theater, more of a show, but we forget the rich history and the cause, the symbolism, what led us to this moment, right? This wasn't pulled out of nowhere, out of thin air. The same in our responses should be to so many of these acts, the things that are happening in our world. We can do tradition, but where are they coming from, right? What is the root? What is the symbolism? So I think that's something you brought up for me. Thank you for reminding us of that. Mm-hmm. So here are a few questions we have from some of our members and friends. The first one, I believe, is rooted in a portion in your service where you kind of shared that to have all these denominations or sects of Christianity, we all started at this one point. Communion seems to be the shared point. However, we ended up in different places. And so someone asked, well, have we really misunderstood what the Great Commission meant? And how did we get so far off base from that kind of shared starting point, if I'm understanding their question correctly?
Empire is one answer. I mean, I think even the text is clouded by the fact that it was written in the time of Roman imperial rule, and there were people writing this who had experience with empire and being in positions of power. So not even the text is exempt from that. But I think with one of the scholars that I quoted, the kind of going back to tradition, going back to the beginning stages and really trying to pull apart what was Jesus actually saying in the Great Commission. Now, there's some scholars who say that the Great Commission didn't happen, that writers made that up and Jesus didn't actually say that. Go forth and make disciples and baptize people. That's an argument. That's another sermon. But I think that with everything, money, power, prestige, privilege can really take something that was essentially beautiful and meaningful and warp it. I was getting in this argument on Twitter. Well, actually, I really wasn't. This person was trying to argue with me, but I wasn't feeding the bait. You should be proud of me. And she was saying, "Well, I don't understand. Why are you Christian? And you support LGBTQ, blah blah blah." And I said, I follow the teachings of Jesus, and she tried to make it seem like the teachings of Jesus were anti-LGBTQ. But when you really go back to the sayings and teachings of Jesus, none of that is in there. So somebody had to add that on at some point. Somebody had to, conflate things that Paul was saying and things they heard in the early empire and put that on Jesus. But when you really go back, if you read, in the old Bibles, Jesus was in red. So if it wasn't in red, Jesus didn't say it. So if you go back and read the red words, Jesus didn't say nothing about some of the stuff y'all talking about in the streets. And so, I don't know how we got to all the places we are, but I do think power, privilege, prestige, money have a lot to do with it. Yeah.
And I think people forget too, something as simple but not so simple as translation, right?
Yeah.
Things that were intentionally left out, things that were intentionally included, which often is my argument for LGBTQ plus inclusion when people try to say Jesus said, and I'm like, not the original, not in the original text. Okay, so here's another question from our good friend Devin, who says, in an era where it seems attention spans are getting shorter, especially since the dawn of social media and hashtag culture, how can we, as social justice advocates, encourage the broader community or society to engage in dangerous remembering continuously? That's the point you brought up in your sermon, that dangerous remembering. So how do we do it? Fix us, help us.
I think, I wouldn't say unfortunately, this is just where we are. I think having helpful, easy takeaways. So one of the things that I found really helpful a couple of weeks ago after the shooting in Uvalde, Texas, was one of our members, Lauren Bent, sent us an email with everything you can do, from education to texting people and calling people. I think in the age of short attention spans, Devin, that's what's needed. There are people who are going to want to sit around and talk and meander and pontificate on things, but there are people who are like, I just need to know what to do. Text this number. That's how I got involved with Moms. Is it Moms for Action or Moms Demand Action? I'm not a mom, but they didn't care. So I texted that number and they were like, you want to come to our Zoom meeting? Sure. That's kind of what you have to do. We don't have a lot of time. Many of us don't have a lot of time to kind of scour the internet and not only search for resources, but in an age, Devin, of false news, search for valid resources, right? And so when somebody is presenting us something that has already been vouched for, this is what the people need. They need us coming with trusted sources quickly, because they don't have time to do fact checking like we used to. And if you just log on to Facebook, you can be clicking on anything that is not truth. And so I think that's what's needed. I think really we're going to have to reshape the way that we think about education and the way we think about doing community together. So like I was saying with worship, right? There used to be a time when church, was your whole day on Sunday. You had Sunday school for an hour, you had church for a couple of hours, you did something after, and you had all of these different touch points to engage people. We don't have that anymore, and we just have to live with that reality, which means we gotta cram it in somehow and get the point out quicker. So, I mean, it's not my favorite thing that people have short attention spans. I mean, I think about even going to theater. I grew up in the theater sitting in, a 3-hour show, fine. Now you got people going to the theater and their phones are out halfway through the show. It's like, are you paying attention? But our attention spans are so short with technology and things. And so we have to adjust or we will lose, the message will get lost.
And you gave us some great resources here. It looks like they all got taken up. So if we need to share those further, we'll be happy to do so. I personally started with the first one, which was the texting for gun reform. And as soon as I texted, they responded back and said, what's your zip code? And they're going to give local updates about reducing gun violence in my community, which I appreciate. So to your point, already doing a lot of that legwork. I didn't have to go find a verified source. I didn't have to see where they are. I didn't have to figure out when the meeting is. It's right to my phone, right? Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that, and a new way of thinking about how we engage and mobilize. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So I've got a few questions here. One, maybe quick if you have an answer, but someone asked, do you know of a site or a web page where you can find the last meals of those who are oppressed and suffering? So this person, and I'm sure some others, would like to do something symbolic for themselves and remember them as Jesus. Could you share with us that information?
I don't know, actually. I was thinking about that, and I didn't want to spend too much time on that section because I was thinking about the last meals of the incarcerated, of people on death row. And I know that list exists somewhere.
Yes, it does. I've seen it. Yes, it does.
Yeah, we've seen it. I would have to find that. So whoever you are, just send me an email. I'm going to look that up. I did not have a list. I just sort of was pulling off the top of my head and what we know about Trayvon and what we know about some of the kids before they went to school in Texas. But I'm sure somebody is compiling that out there. I will look that up for you gladly.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do think, and I think also, this is interesting because we had this exhibit in the Heaton Foyer, I think, during Lent or Holy Week. What was it? It was like the passion of the people, the death row people. Stations of the Cross.
Okay. There you go.
Yes, Carrie, somewhere, I don't see her, but yes,
there she
great.
is.
Okay. The Stations of the Cross featuring incarcerated men. And so I would love to go in more depth about that because I think that's a whole sermon right there. I mean, really dealing with that and how that it relates to Last Supper. We can play around with that and explore that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. So this is someone a little bit up their background that ties into their question. So I'm going to read the whole thing first, and you pick out what you want to get here.
Okay.
So someone says, when standing up to come to the front, there's something in me that says I'll be interrupting something. Will others go? But this is a healthy interruption. For if I can't interrupt my own expectations of a service, how can I interrupt the violence committed every day against marginalized people? So first, let's stop right there because you're preaching. Okay?
I mean, yeah, that's a sermon.
So the question becomes, so what are some other healthy interruptions? Why is my body so hesitant if and when I hear the words permitting me? How can I cross this space more often? So someone, and I appreciate this, is dealing with that wrestling, that internal and it could be tied, like they said, to their expectations or their traditions. And it's kind of hard to step out of that sometimes, but they need to and they want to because they recognize that those are the times when disruption, interruption are so important. Mm-hmm. How can we get there? Help us.
Well, this is how I come to worship. And I learned this, of course, I just told Karen this or somebody about Claudio Carvalho, who was the guy, the professor that I did the Decolonizing Liturgy, Reimagining Rituals of Worship talk with last year virtually. It's on YouTube. And he was my professor at Union. And in his work as a pastor in South America, he said, one should always come to worship expecting to be disrupted or interrupted. One should never know what's gonna happen. And he was a pastor in a rural town in South America where they would literally, if somebody in their congregation was in need, they would literally leave the church house and go to that person's house and have church at that person's house and like feed them or do whatever. That was how they worshiped. It wasn't about we have this thing every day. Now we are in this culture where we have this thing, right? And so how do we play with it? How do we still make it recognizable? So part of decolonizing liturgy is to still make it recognizable so that you, even if you're wrestling, it's still a familiar enough action where it's not so far out of your comfort zone. All of you, most of you in here have taken communion, right? So it wasn't like I was asking you to do something that was completely unfamiliar. You've never walked up the center aisle before. Now, you may have never walked up in the middle of a sermon, but it's still an act, there's still some familiarity there. And so I think that's where it starts. We have to keep doing those things. We have to keep reimagining the rituals of worship we already have, not so much creating new ones, but reimagining the ones we already have so that you can get more comfortable and feel that. Another person said something when I preached a sermon last summer about dancing. They're like, I just want to get up and dance. And I was like, do it, you know? I think the first step is the hardest. Once you get comfortable, you can't think about what people think about you. You know, you can't worry, oh my gosh, are they gonna kick me out? No, dance. I mean, if you feel like the Spirit is leading you to dance or sing or say amen or clap your hands, this should be a brave enough space where you can do that if it is authentic to you. But yeah, I always say just go for it, and I hope that we can continue to introduce these moments in worship that are not so much jarring, but an invitation to just step over the line, just a little bit, just put your toe in the water. It's not like you're leaping across the room, just put your toe in the water. And if it wasn't for you to get up, that's fine too. Observing is an option, right? Watching others do that is an option.
I like that. And similar to that point, somebody's got to be the first one.
Somebody has to be the first one.
You know, so if you don't mind making that sacrifice of being the first, who knows who else will be behind you, right? But somebody has to be first. Okay. I've got a few other questions here. I heard you mention in the sermon, and I was really moved by this, again, that illustration or what have you, example of talking about, again, we're most Christians starting at this shared place of communion, but diverging so far and ending up in separate places. And you accounted for that by saying there are different memories, right? People are remembering differently. Could you just talk a little bit about that? I find that very fascinating, from thinking about different denominations, but also you brought up the very real examples of Christian white nationalism, as well as another divergence. So what are some of the memories that are influencing those sides of Christianity versus other sides of Christianity? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there are memories, and I think there are also mismemories. So I think, when I mentioned the thing about this person on Twitter saying something about Jesus being anti-LGBTQ, that's a mismemory. They're misremembering something that does not exist in the text, right? But I think that there are people who are remembering things from, in my personal opinion, the wrong vantage point. So I think particularly about white Christian nationalism is rooted in the culture of manifest destiny. And so they are remembering themselves as a particular person in the text, right? As God has given me this land, which is really rooted in a lot of the Old Testament Hebrew Bible. God has given us this land. God has promised us this land. So we're going to go in and we're going to take it by any means necessary. Now, that's controversial, but that's in the text, right? So we have Israelites going into, the text goes on and on about the many enemies that the Israelites have. They have the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Perizzites. I mean, they've gone into everybody's stuff and taken it, right? Because God has promised. That's what led to manifest destiny. That's what led to white Christian nationalism in this country. And so they are remembering that. That's their memory before anything else. They are remembering that they have been given this, that they are the chosen one, beloved by God to take. I think that's part of their remembering. I'm trying to think of some other examples that might not be. I think people a lot of times who call themselves Christian remember Paul.
Yeah.
They remember the teachings or the sayings or whatever, the writings, the epistles of Paul. Right, so they're remembering Ephesians 6 when it says, "Wives, submit to your husband," or they're remembering, Timothy. Was it 1st or 2nd Timothy where women shouldn't speak in the blah blah blah? Right. No, I mean, I try to actively push that out of my brain as much. But they are remembering that, and that is not the teachings of Jesus.
Right.
That is Paul's writings. They're two separate things. And so I believe that I'm a follower of the teachings of Christ. I take the teachings of Jesus seriously. There are some things that Paul said that helps us understand the early church, the formation of the church at Corinth, the formation of the church at Ephesus. But I am not taking Paul's writings the kind of seriously that I'm taking the teachings of Jesus.
There you go.
Right? And so a lot of that happens in Christianity. They're remembering different things. So I'm always telling people I am rooted in the teachings of Jesus. I'm inspired by other things in the text. I'm inspired by a lot of the Hebrew Bible. That was Jesus's upbringing. That was Jesus's culture. He was Jewish. But I am rooted in the teachings of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me as well, too, kind of to the other question about the interruptions, that remember that communion, right, was a newer institution but it was rooted in the basings of Judaism, right, that Jesus was raised in, but Jesus interrupted what the disciples were anticipating to be this meal that they were going to share together as well, too, because there was just that yearning at the time. That was when Jesus needed to make that interruption in that moment. So I'm glad you tying that all together. It's making sense. Mm-hmm. Making sense. Good stuff, y'all. This is good stuff. Good teachments. Can you talk a little bit about earlier, you started from in your sermon from that place about that holy hunger, right? You started with your physical hunger because you skip breakfast often, but you talked about that in a way about a holy hunger. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, again, interacting with people online who are constantly asking certain of us why we're Christian, why are we still Christian after everything that has been done in this country in the name of Christianity that is just horrific. Why are we still Christian? I think there is a holy hunger that keeps many of us coming back to this place. If we weren't hungry, we would just go, we'd be at home. We would go to brunch. We would do something else with our time. I do think that there is this hunger. We want to not feel good, but we want to know how we can always be becoming better people. As Eddie Glaude says, becoming better people so that we can fundamentally transform the conditions of our living together, right? And so I think that's the holy hunger, is always wanting to be better. We will never be the best person that we can be until we die. I believe that. I'm always going to be striving to be better than I was yesterday. And that is, for me, that is the holy hunger. And just looking at the peril in the world, I mean, on a week-by-week basis, we're getting these horrific phone calls from people about them about to be evicted, and they don't have food for their baby, they don't have formula, they don't have this, right? So that keeps us hungry in a certain way, right? I'm never satisfied because the world won't let me be satisfied. It's just, it's always something to do. There's always a task.
Now, Jesus did say this, that the harvest was plentiful.
Yeah.
But the laborers were few. That's in the red text. That's in the red text. The words of Christ in red. Okay.
I know we have 4 minutes because I don't want to make anybody late for the next thing.
Exactly. So I have one last question to go into here, if I'm understanding. So someone shares that growing up, the church had the invitation. You did that in church, right? And this person noticed that we don't really do that here at Myers Park. But what you just did here was an invitation. Mm-hmm. So their kind of question is, and it was an invitation, and they're specifying that you use that language, and it was a call to action and not a guilt trip, right? Mm-hmm. But their question is this: so why now? Why haven't we kind of done this before? Why now?
Because I had an idea. I think we've been talking about this as a staff, but the time is now to reimagine how we do things together, how we communicate together. We can't wait any longer to reimagine that. It's now. Mm-hmm. It's now. So that's the easy answer. I think that I do miss those moments in worship where people had an altar call. They would come. I miss those invitation moments where people would come up and be, the pastor would pray or something, or people would come up to accept Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, which is what I was used to as a kid. They would, after the sermon, the doors of the church were open, and that was time. The music would play, and if Jesus was on your heart or you needed prayer, you would come up at the end of the sermon. And so for me, that's natural. For me, having music at the end of the sermon is natural. For me, inviting somebody to come up for prayer or something else is natural for me. And so always trying to get back to what is authentic in my spirit is why I did this today. And I mean, I see a future for more things like this.
Yeah, I definitely grew up in that kind of environment too. There was an expectation of a response immediately after the sermon, whether that's giving your life to Christ, joining the church, confessing, whatever it was, there was that immediate type of response. And here at Myers Park, we do the silent confession, which is a way to respond. But I guess I'm kind of old school sometimes. You got to get on your feet, if you're able to do so. You got to kind of put some motion and some action behind your response. So I hope to see more things like this in the future too. Our time is winding up, but we just have to say again, this was a powerful message, one that again, we were able to take actions here. We're going to continue to take actions and commitment to work on these actions this week. Thank you for bringing us the idea and space to respond as well in the same breath. If you have further questions for Reverend Mia or anyone else here at the Myers Park Baptist Church, be sure to send us an email. All of our emails are in your bulletin. They're available on our website. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again. Don't forget, if you're able to, thank you. Don't forget, if you have a few more minutes, we'd love for you to join us over at Heaton Hall.
Yes.
It's where we have an author, a guest speaker coming to just share a little bit about one of their newer books. We'd love to see you over there. Continue to have a wonderfully blessed Sunday afternoon. God bless you, and thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you.